We heard what was happening in schools across Oregon. So we asked these 8 elementary school teachers from all different districts to tell us what they're seeing every day. Raise your hand if you believe classroom disruptions are at a crisis level. Everybody.
Absolutely.
This is a day after day experience in many classrooms.
Literal screaming, like they're screaming for help, literally. And so sometimes that comes out in, suicide threats or death threats.
They are throwing furniture, they're running through the building, going to the office, throwing chairs at windows. And it's really intense.
We've seen students hurting other students or throwing other belongings.
Students throwing tables over, throwing chairs at adults, at other students, wood blocks. I've been called every name in the book. And it's traumatizing for other kids to see you being physically harmed.
Have any of you been hurt?
I've been punched and kicked, and I've had colleagues bitten, slapped.
Scratched.
Yeah, scratched with
Pinched.
fingernail. I've had fingernail marks down my arm.
You're saying this happens a lot?
Oh yeah.
Daily.
Oh, it's every
around
day.
the building.
Every day?
Absolutely.
I don't think parents are aware of really what goes on unless they volunteer, but so many parents aren't aware of what's going on in our schools.
Those types of experiences become so commonplace, like kids don't go home and talk about it anymore.
Classroom disruptions aren't always tracked by districts, but employee injuries are. In Beaverton, 72% of the nearly 1,800 employees injured since 2017 were caused by students. In Salem-Keizer, who only had numbers for this year, it was 73%. And in Hillsborough, 65% of employee injuries were caused by students over the last 2 school years. Some of the descriptions of those incidents include a kindergarten student swinging a metal rod at a teacher, another kindergartner punching a teacher in the stomach, and an elementary school student spraying cleaning spray into a teacher's eyes.
I don't think the students want to hurt someone, they just don't know how to communicate their feelings.
And when the most serious outbursts happen, the teachers don't remove the student melting down. They have to send all of the other students out of the room. It's called a classroom clear.
A room clear is pretty much where a student is so dysregulated that your students are not safe. And when I'm by myself, I just tell my students to walk in and the other teacher will know what it means.
Teachers say the clear-outs lead to a loss of learning they can't get back.
Think of that student who in kindergarten lost so many hours of instruction because the teacher was busy helping those kids with high needs. By the time they reach me in 5th grade, they're lacking some fundamental skills that are multiple grade levels behind.
If a student is flipping out, you cannot touch them? Is that correct? I mean, by law, you cannot touch them in any way.
That's correct. Unless they're about to inflict physical harm on themselves, then you might want to try to go in and calm them down as best as you can, but really no touching whatsoever.
And that's what leads to the hurting.
Yes.
When the kids are in the street.
We do a lot of hurting.
You do a lot of hurting.
Yeah.
Hurting is when teachers have to try and guide students to safety without touching them, even if they run away.
Often they try to run around you.
Well, they see it as a game. And so for a lot of these children, now you're playing chase with them. And instead of having to learn, they get to run around in a location of their choice.
Raise your hand if you believe that the current laws allow you to deal with these disruptions in the best way. No one.
You have teachers who say, I'm afraid to grab a kid who's about to run out into the street. That's the way that we are being told that we're supposed to deal with this, and that's ridiculous.
Representative Barbara Smith Warner and lawmakers across Oregon and across the aisle told us they've heard these stories for months.
I heard a story about a kindergartner breaking the eardrum of their teacher. I heard stories about 2nd graders throwing a chair through a window.
And one situation where one of those students had some scissors and actually did a situation where he was going to hurt her.
The student ran into the road, and again the principal could not touch the student but had to herd him out of the road and make sure that the cars were aware that there was a situation going on.
Why is the disruptive child not pulled from the classroom? Why is that child left in the classroom and others, all others, are pulled out.
State Representative Brian Clem heard it from his own daughter.
And she said, oh yeah, a first grader yelled, and I didn't want to say it, horrible obscenities. As bad as you can imagine. She said the first grader yelled them for an hour. And no one could do anything except just wait.
Clem asked why the teachers were clearing out rooms and hurting students.
At first I was like, God, why are you doing that? They're like, well, you passed it. What are you talking about? Why are we doing it? You passed this thing. And we're like, I don't remember voting for that. And they said, well, the way it got interpreted was, yeah, you really can't touch them at all.
Both Clem and Smith Warner point to a law passed in 2011 and amended in 2013 that says a teacher can only physically restrain a student when there is the threat of imminent serious bodily injury. The law was passed in response to an increased number of special needs students being restrained or put in isolation rooms. You believe this is really a problem with how the law is being interpreted?
We passed legislation to respond to a problem, and in responding to that problem, we inadvertently create another problem. And so let's get the pendulum back to a good place.
It's an absurd interpretation of the law, probably, but whatever. We'll just fix it and go back to what we had before.
Representative Clem is co-sponsoring a bill that would allow educators to physically assist students without fear of getting sued.
They don't have to be restrained and grabbed. Physically assist you to the principal's office. Physically assist you to the timeout area. Just calm down. You're on your own here. You need some time? Fine. I'll just be right over here waiting.
Teachers say it's one part of the solution, but they need help. More adults in the classroom and the money to fund those jobs.
We have such little, tiny, minds to meld, and we need more support.
They say the bigger issue, why these classroom disruptions are happening at all.
We do need to have some deep looking into why.
This is our problem. It's not just a school problem. It's not just a teacher problem. It's our collective societal problem.
Wow, what a problem. It's unbelievable.
It really is. The word shocking is overused, but those stories are shocking. The biggest question that people have, why are these disruptive incidents happening? There are theories as to why, but no exact cause. One, these kids are experiencing more trauma at home. Two, this is the first generation really going through the school system raised with a device in their hand, from a phone to a tablet to really any electronic.
There is so much surprising in that story, but what surprised you most in doing your investigation?
I would say the most surprising thing, just how violent these incidents were. Reading those incident reports, seeing teacher after teacher getting bit. These are young kids. These teachers are getting punched in the stomach. They're getting the wind knocked out of them. And these are elementary schools.
Well, I'm watching the piece, I keep thinking about the law and the way that they're all having to interpret this.
It does seem so absurd that they have to take the whole class out and leave the disruptive student instead of removing the disruptive student, and that's all because of a law that says they can't touch a student?
So all these teachers are being told by their districts they cannot touch these students. So the Oregon Department of Education called me today and they said, no, teachers can touch students. But none of these teachers are being told that. And this is happening across the state, because why else would they be hurting students, guiding them without touching them? So there's a disconnect there.
And we know legislation is going to be proposed, but what can parents do who saw this story? What can they do now?
So the teachers I interviewed, they said when parents come together, that's when change happens. School buses, signs.
People need to know what's going on.
Saxophones. Just some of the sights and sounds at the March for Our Students rally.
Our children deserve wraparound services that include treatment, counselors, therapists, care, healing, and restoration.
Nicole Watson teaches 4th grade in Portland Public Schools. She was one of 4,500 educators in Salem calling for more funding.
At my smaller elementary school, we only have one counselor. Imagine at some middle and high schools where students are showing up traumatized and impacted by regular things that happen in life, and they don't have someone to unpack that trauma with.
I'm only one woman.
Michelle Eddy Malo doesn't have to imagine. She's the only psychologist for 4,000 kids in the greater Albany Public School District. Federal guidelines suggest one counselor to 250 kids.
Our students deserve better. And in my neighboring districts of Corvallis, Lebanon, Jefferson, Scioto, Sweet Home, they don't even have school psychologists. They don't even employ them.
We kept hearing about disrupted learning in Oregon from teachers like Kathy Hamill.
I've had about 4 students this year make suicide comments So 10-year-olds are coming to school with a whole different suitcase filled of stuff than they used to.
And paraeducators like Sydney Casper.
The classrooms are in crisis, as you guys have been pointing out. There are kindergartners who are throwing chairs in classrooms, and it's not because they're bad kids, it's because they're not supported.
Melinda Ryan brought her 10-year-old daughter to the rally.
Everything that we're fighting for affects her, right? She is in our schools.
Ryan was one of 8 teachers in our first Classrooms in Crisis investigation into the rise of disruptive incidents. She said the problem is out, now they need money for solutions.
So that we can have more trained staff on site to support our students and our teachers.
Representative Barbara Smith Warner agrees. The Joint Education Committee member says they are working on a proposal for a dedicated revenue stream to fund schools.
We're going to do this session. We're going to do it sooner rather than later. And I'm just eager to get it done. Everywhere I go, people say, are we really going to do it this year? And I say, yes, we are.
I haven't seen these in a while. When it snowed, we'd go out for snowball fights, dress-up days.
Fred Ochoa looks back through 28 years of teaching, the last 21 in Salem.
In the quiet of the day, kind of wonder, did I do a good job?
He said that answer started to become no more often.
You know, as the years go by in these photos and I get to the last part of my career, it's more like, how did I ever get through that class?
He said classroom disruptions were getting worse. It's an issue we've been covering for months in schools across Oregon. Teachers have sent us pictures of the aftermath. Ochoa said his students were hurting others.
This one student was daily, almost by the hour, getting up, bullying kids, disrupting people, putting his hands on kids.
Or running away.
She would get up, hit other students, throw her chair, head out the door, head out the school, and become what we call a runner.
But it wasn't the kids that made him retire early.
It was always bad. What got worse is the lack of support. That last year, I was close to a nervous breakdown.
The worst thing is caring so deeply about kids and then seeing them in crisis and not being helped. It's a really awful, helpless feeling.
Emily Burchet resigned from her teaching job at Portland Public Schools after 7 years.
I saw students in crisis that we were not meeting their needs. And when their needs weren't met with the resources that we had, they were being violent, they were being defiant, they were running out of classrooms, they were threatening the teachers, throwing scissors.
She said the district doesn't have the people, training, or resources to offer the mental health supports the kids desperately need.
We need more people in the classrooms. We need less people that are walking in and taking data for 20 minutes and then telling the classroom teacher more things that they need to be doing. And instead, we need behavioral paras, we need mental health professionals.
She said the classroom became so unsafe for her and her students, she had to leave.
It's really sad, and I feel really guilty about leaving my students behind, and my community behind. I'm at peace with my decision, but I'm still grieving the loss of that profession that I love so much.
Numbers we obtained from the Oregon Department of Education show a slight increase in the number of teachers not returning to the classroom compared to 5 years ago. But the state doesn't keep track of the reasons why those teachers left. KGW sent our own survey to the more than 300 teachers who contacted us after our first Classrooms in Crisis investigation. The more than 60% who answered said classroom disruptions have caused them to consider quitting, and 17% said they quit because of it. Burchet and Ochoa worry others will leave too if districts don't make real changes soon. Smaller class sizes, trained adults in the classroom, a focus on mental health.
As a general rule in medicine, what's the point of treating the symptoms and not trying to cure the problem?
I had been nearly stabbed. I had helped stop a student from running into a street where a car was coming.
These 3 women are part of a group of 8 paraeducators suing Portland Public Schools for what they say happened to them in classrooms and the lack of action to help them by the school district.
They were aware of the physical abuse,
the feeling sexually assaulted.
Joyce Moore, a paraeducator for 26 years, was the first to file suit.
I have got to do the right thing.
She mostly worked in classrooms and PPS schools designated for students with mental and behavioral needs. She said her job was to help teachers. Instead, she became a punching bag.
I've had my breast grabbed so violently it left bruises. I've had bodies rubbed against me in a sexual nature. I've had my rotator cuff torn. I've been head-butted, several concussions.
Julie Manzella started as a teacher's assistant and then became a paraeducator at Sunnyside School.
I've had water bottles thrown at me, bricks thrown towards me, been kicked, bitten. My bra has been exposed. I've had my dress looked up.
Sarah Conley also works at Sunnyside and with kids on individual education plans or IEPs. She said instead of helping those kids, she spent her days handling violent, disruptive incidents.
The hardest thing that I experienced was having my body exposed, like my clothes completely pulled down. And probably the worst part of that was because it was in front of many students, and to have to see someone that they trust and rely on exposed like that was very hard.
Did the district know this was happening?
I am certain that the district knew that this was happening, because I spoke every day to my supervisors, to other teachers, to other staff members, and I feel like we were asking for help consistently, regularly.
While they say the district knew, they say the parents didn't, because the paraeducators were not allowed to tell them.
If a parent sees a marking on their child, you cannot say what happened.
It's left up to the teachers, so we rely on the teachers communicating to the families, and we were told that we needed to focus on the positive things that were happening with the students.
It would be hard to tell them that it was an okay day when you had been punched in the face or spit on or had chunks of your hair pulled out.
Once Joyce filed her lawsuit, paraeducators from other school districts started coming forward.
I've been a paraeducator for 10 years, working 6 years in Beaverton School District.
Paraeducator and assistant football coach John Persich filed a lawsuit against the Beaverton School District.
I was working with severely impacted autism students.
Persich said he regularly reported issues with one particular high school student.
Inappropriate, unwanted touching in genital areas, pulling up pant legs, pulling up skirts, physically grabbing breasts, women's crotches.
He said the district did not help the teachers or staff.
With this particular student, we never had any intervention from the school district or behavior specialists. No one ever came in to really help give us any tools or suggestions to make the situation better for that student and the other students and the staff members involved.
He said the incidents got worse. The student continued to assault students and staff.
It was escalating. Myself and other colleagues were aware of it escalating. We communicated that to the people we thought we needed to. Nothing was done. I was violently sexually assaulted. The student came up from behind and shoved his hand down my pants and inserted his finger into my anus and caused internal bruising and a contusion, and devastated me.
Persich reported it and has not been back to work since that day.
The student that assaulted me was not suspended, went to school the next day and went into the public on a field trip. I'm the victim, and I'm being shuffled away and pushed under the carpet.
I was appalled.
Rebecca Camberling represents Persich, all the PPS paraeducators, and another paraeducator suing the Gresham-Barlow School District.
So you're saying all three districts knew this was happening and did not help these paraeducators?
That is what we allege in our complaints, yes. We are hoping for district accountability for these unsafe classrooms.
All three school districts told KGW Investigates they could not comment on pending litigation.
The district needs to be accountable for their inability to intervene and make it better for everyone involved and make it safer.
One day I just said, I've got to go public. Kids can no longer suffer like this. staff can no longer suffer. We're here to help.
That is so disturbing. No one should go through what those paraeducators went through.
It's hard to hear. It's hard to hear those stories, but they felt so strongly about sharing them. They want the public to know what's happening. And you know, we really wanted to hear from the districts. They couldn't comment on pending litigation, but Portland Public Schools did tell me a little more. A spokesperson told me paraeducators are critical to the success of our special education classrooms and programs. They provide vital support to students and educators and are a valuable part of Portland Public Schools workforce. And he said, you know, we do support our paraeducators.
One thing that really stood out to me was kind of the stream of conversation and how these paraeducators can't speak directly to the parents about, you know, the things we just heard.
Right, they cannot tell parents. It's left up to the teacher. But many times they say the teacher was not in the room. The teacher didn't witness what happened. So the paraeducator would have to tell the teacher, sometimes hours later. Then the teacher would have to tell the parent. It's like a bad game of telephone, they said.
Well, Kristen, what changes do the paraeducators want to see so this doesn't just keep happening to others?
You know, this is such a complex issue. We've been covering classroom disruptions for months now. Now, today, we're talking about special needs students. We've heard it over and over again from educators. They need help. They need highly trained, certified behavioral specialists in the classrooms. These paraeducators say they want to be believed, and they want the districts to be transparent, and they just want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone.
Lawmakers now looking at budget and whether they can hire more people in Salem right now. Thank you, Kristen, for shedding a light on this.
We'll start by explaining the Student Success Act. Now, this has been called unprecedented, historic. Simply put, it's a big deal. So the largest school funding package ever passed in Oregon is going to pump $1 billion into the state's school system. Well, how? They passed a 0.57% tax on all businesses that make more than $1 million. What is that money going to go towards? Things like lower class sizes, mental health supports, and early childhood education. You may remember last month that Republicans did something very similar to what they're doing right now. They refused to go to work unless Democrats agreed to kill a vaccine and gun bill, which they did. Something else we want to highlight is called the Safe Classrooms Bill. Now, this fixes something that we pointed out in our very first Classrooms in Crisis story, where I sat down with a group of teachers and they told me about violence happening in their classrooms and why they say the law made it almost impossible for them to handle it appropriately.
If a student is flipping out, you cannot touch them. Is that correct? I mean, by law, you cannot touch them in any way.
That's correct. Unless they're about to inflict physical harm on themselves, then you might want to try to go in and calm them down as best as you can, but really no touching whatsoever.
This law will change that. It clarifies a physical restraint law passed in 2011, interpreted to mean that teachers could not touch students at all and instead had to herd them or guide them to safety without touching them. Now, because of the Safe Classrooms Bill, teachers will be able to touch or grab a student if they, for example, run out of the classroom and into the road.